Good evening. I must have scared a whole part of people away, I think. Well, it's good to see you again. And as I said, yesterday we dealt with forgiving. And one of the things that I have to say before we start here is, because I don't know if it was clear enough what I said in this case. No one should be ever forced to forgive. Did I say that? No. Okay, I'm telling you now. And that's one of the main things that was important for yesterday. And I should have said it earlier, because I heard that, it was something that hadn't been heard. And one of there are major steps. There are loads of steps, and I have resources to give you tomorrow. I'll give you pages of things. But in the therapy for forgiveness, which is a psychological therapy now, it's very clear that you can never force anyone to forgive, nor should you shame them about it. Because if I say, oh, you have to forgive, no, why should I? It's my free choice not to. And maybe I cannot do it now. I remember having had a very, very hard time with a priest in our congregation once. And it was really, really, really rough. And I suffered for a number of years with that. And I couldn't say in my mind or in my heart that I forgive you. So it took me, I don't know how many years, but a long time to continue to pray for him. And how would I pray for him? Just the Our Father and Hail Mary. Because that's the only thing I could offer for him. But it took me years of saying an Our Father and a Hail Mary for him. And suddenly one morning, I will tell you this much, I was able to wake up and say, hey, I'm not carrying any hatred. I'm no longer a victim to the hatred. So I guess I must have forgiven him. Because he was no longer in my talk, he was no longer in my speech, he was no longer in my memory in that sense. And I remember having seen him again, and I thought to myself, that poor man, he is in such dire straits. He doesn't realize either how much harm he did to me and others, or how much it doesn't matter anymore. So that's, it took me, I would say it had taken me about 30 years for that. And that was not an easy thing to do. So what I needed to say was, never let anyone push you into forgiving or saying, okay, I forgive him. Because you don't. You don't. If you don't, you don't. So what can you do? You just continue. And you do the small exercises, and I'm going to give you some resources tomorrow probably. You do some exercises to help you to at least pray as mechanically as you have to. Because sometimes we pray mechanically, and that's okay. At least our mouths are doing it, even if our hearts aren't there. And we have to go step by step by step. And it's not something that you would push. So, if any priest ever says to you in confession, you have got to go out and be reconciled because, you cannot be a Christian without it. The word I would use is, oh, Paki. You really want me to say it? I'm going to say it. Bullshit. Does that make sense to you? No, really, I cannot allow somebody to force me into anything. And I won't stand for anybody using obedience to this or obedience to that, which is just the use of power. Today, I started this morning with a series of questions asking people what they wanted me to talk about. I was going to start that this way, but it lasted for a while. I sort of got the sense of where people in the parish might want to go. And I am going to give my little short presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions, which you might want to work in small groups or not, as the case may be. I know you have a lot of questions, and I know they had a lot of questions. We had this whole thing filled with questions. And we were able to answer them in their, in fully going through what I went through. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to have patience. I will try to be finished in about 20 minutes to half an hour, unless you stop me in the middle of things, okay? Which is okay. You can do that too if you want to. I'm going to go down a few steps from here because I have had 3 different presentations on here. So let's put it this way, and all in one row, so a huge number of things. So let me just go on. There we go. These are the questions that most people will ask. I'm just telling you. You know, how could this happen? Why did Catholic leaders try to protect the institution rather than the vulnerable? When will we have a full accounting of the facts regarding these crimes and their cover-up? And when will we hold people accountable for these failures? Those have been the questions that have been gathered through the United States over the past few months. It's interesting. This article that I'm going to cite right now is actually a very interesting one. It talks about waves of sexual abuse, which is what we have had in the United States. And not just in the United States, but throughout the world. And, you know, our own first wave actually began in the 1890s, in the 1800s. And who knows before that what happened, you know? With the great number of priests who had to come and be at the behest of all of the groups that were here, the Irish priests, you know, the English ones that came over, the Germans, you know, the very first ones, and then you had, of course, the French that came, the Latino community that came. So you've had everything. Right now we're in the middle of having a large Asian population and an influx of Asian priests from Asia. So we have become the, quotes, ex-melting pot. But it is a church that has had many people, many priests, and with it, somehow or another, there have been waves of abuse. Let me go through that a little bit. The clerical abuse crisis in the Catholic Church simmered for decades and exploded, really, in 2002, and has now reemerged in 2018 on a global scale. And you're aware of that. The Catholic Church's abuse scandal was the trigger for revelations of institutional churches and generalized attention to sexual abuse of minors. And it's very interesting because as you look at the material that is available, and I've looked at the material that's available, it is not here only. It is not confined to our church. It is, in fact, the Baptists have just had their own beginning wave, so to speak, of sexual abuse, where they have found out that some of their ministers, their Baptist ministers, Assembly of God ministers, you know, Lutheran ministers also, have been abusers. When I went into my parish in St. Gertrude the Great in Bell Gardens, I was befriended by a Lutheran minister, and he was a very nice man. He's one of the few that would come around and chat, because we had all of the other evangelicals that wouldn't talk to you, because you were Catholic. You know, you don't want to get contaminated. And so, and that was true, quite honestly, you know. But he was the chaplain for the police at the time. And my parish was right in front of City Hall and the police department, which was very interesting to have it because we still got broken into. You know, I remember the day they threw a lovely rock through my beautiful, beautiful stained glass window. And, oh no, we didn't know where it is. We didn't see it, you know. They used to park in our parking lot. And I guess that day they weren't parking and having their lunch there, but, you know. So anyway, but this man was very nice, very kind to me. And he helped with the police, and then he was also a counselor at the local high school. Well, at first he was accused of abusing a member of his own family, a nephew. And he was probably in his 14 or 15 When that came to light, then others followed. And I think we were up to 11 and counting. And of course he was judged, put away in jail. But what was interesting is, I'm going to tell you right now, he was given, his family and he were given the royal treatment by the police because he was their chaplain. And he had helped so many police, so they had the trouble thinking that he was actually doing this, the police themselves. And so when they took him in, it was really the royal treatment. It was sort of like, he was they did not hurt him in any way, which is fine. But then you never heard anything about it in the courts. And then we found out he was put into jail and taken to a federal prison, and the number came out. And they took care of his family, which was very good. But it was amazing to me because I would never have suspected it. He'd been a great friend at the beginning. He wrote to me from jail, and I wrote to him. And it was not a very comfortable situation for him and for me either. So he stopped writing, I think. But it's interesting. It has families, scouts, places where you would never believe it happens. And so you begin to think to yourself, what is it? What is it? And how did it get into the church, supposedly, with all of their requirements? And I'm not just talking about archdioceses and dioceses, but I'm talking also about religious orders, too. The Jesuits, they've come out with a whole list of theirs. And some of them are really frightening. The man, I'll give you right now, the man who ordained me, the bishop who ordained me, they had to, when he died, they had to bury him quietly because there would have been so many people angry at him. His secretary, who had his mother had made my, what do you call it, the chasuble that I wore for my ordination, which I still have. He was a friend of my babysitter who had children. My babysitter means she took care of me, and then she had children. So, I've always kept in touch with her. But her son, was molested with a number of them. He had, at one point, the highest count of number of, molestations here in the archdiocese. When you start learning all this stuff, it just sort of, because some of us, not all, were somewhat naive, too, about all this stuff. First wave, 1984 to 1993, began with the case of a Father Gilbert Gout in Lafayette, Louisiana. He was a predatory pedophile who molested at least 37 boys in 4 different parishes. His case touched off a wave of cases and drew national attention, causing some dioceses to begin to develop policies for responding to abuse. That was about the time that I was here. 85 to 90 I was here. And I was also provincial of the area for the Josephites. And at that time, I was called in to help with a family up north. They wanted to talk about their abuse of their son. So I went up there. I talked to the Archbishop, Quinn at the time, and I put him in contact with the family. And I thought, okay, things are going to be taken care of. This guy's going to be thrown away and, banished to the next world or someplace. And they did. They sent him to Rome to study. The next time he appeared, he became the voice piece for San Francisco Diocese on issues of abuse. He was the go-to man. And the worst part about that is that, well, not the worst part. I was called, I think when was it now? Just before I began my sabbatical, I was called, and they received the message here, and they said, there are some lawyers that would like to talk to you about sex abuse. I go, what have I done? Where have I done it? I don't remember. So They did, but they wanted me to talk to me about being a witness for them when they took it to court. And they were expecting me to say no. I said, of course I will. This is what happened. There's not much that I can say, but anything you ask, I'll be there. And when it came out that he had gone beyond the time limit, at that time they had a time limit, he couldn't press charges. But he called me. The young man who had been abused called me and said, thank you. You're the first one who said he would do anything. The first priest who said he would come and witness. And that was very sad. But it was during that time, and things were happening. Believe me, I knew things were happening. Why? Because I kept getting these calls from other people to help them out with this, that, and the other. So while I was here at this parish, I was also helping out in other places, and it was very difficult. Now, during this time period already, the U.S. bishops and the Bishops' Conference and the Vatican began to develop and strengthen anti-abuse policies. First wave. In that first wave, during that time, in the Archdiocese of Chicago, there's some people who hated Cardinal Bernardin because he was too, quotes, liberal. And he was really a man who was trying to say to people, we have to go back to Vatican II. He was a Vatican II priest, so to speak. It was a watershed moment in large part due to the efforts of Chicago's Cardinal Joseph Bernardin, who was the first to put into place credible diocesan policies against clerical sexual abuse. He culled, get this, he culled 40 years of diocesan records at that moment already to identify potential abusers and remove those still active, but recommended a new model for handling accusations, a lay-dominated committee, including a victim or a victim's relative, a non-clerical gatekeeper, and a publicized hotline. The Chicago model was imitated or at least adapted elsewhere. It was taken here in the Los Angeles Archdiocese, but much later. Well, not that much later, because it was, and he's accused of having moved a lot of people himself, Cardinal Mahoney. Believe it or not, that is the model that we've had. This model, the Chicago model, is a model we've had since his time here in the Archdiocese. Chicago is also the first diocese to establish an office for the protection of children and youth, which we have in the Archdiocese now. Now, a lot of people were asking me, what do we do? Well, I'll tell you in just a minute what this Archdiocese does. 1992 to 2001, second wave. The case of Father James Porter in Fall River, Massachusetts, who abused over 100 boys and girls in Massachusetts parishes in the 1960s, was sentenced to only 18 years of prison. That's not very much for those people, Yeah, he should have been for a much longer time, right? If they were taken seriously. Now you're going to tell me, you mean you'd agree to him and being, yeah, of course. That's one of the very first things. Again, in this model, you have to have justice. It's not just, forgive, forget. Again, how do you can forgive and forget that? You have to have accountability and justice. So during this time, the U.S. Bishops' Conference drew up a statement of general principles to guide responses to allegations of abuse. And this was the thing. You respond to allegations promptly. You immediately suspend anyone reasonably suspected, while proceeding with an investigation and making use of appropriate medical evaluation and intervention. Comply with civil law, cooperate with criminal investigations, reach out to victims, and deal with the issue as openly as possible. Now, shall I tell you what the psychologists were saying at that time? They were actually, even before that, psychologists had not yet put into the DSM, the, what do you call it, the manual for mental health, or not mental health, health manual, and it is mental health, the predatory person yet. And, they didn't have it yet in there. But they did have, of all things, the gay person as being ill. Well, a few years later, they removed one, and they put the other one in. And during this time, of course, people were blaming all of the, quotes, gay priests, and have been ever since. But there's a complete difference between pedophilia and a homosexual orientation. You can have a homosexual orientation or a heterosexual orientation, which is for adult persons. That's the normally healthy one, whether it be gay, whether it be straight, adults. As far as having other types, and I have another set of slides showing what they are, you are a predator. You can be a homosexual predator and pedophilia, or a heterosexual predator. You can be a man, you can be a woman. Predators come in all sizes and shapes, and you cannot tell who is a predator easily. They've developed some sort of studies and profiles of them, but it's only on what they do. It's not like, oh, you can see him going down the street, or her down the street. Because, as you know well, in the newspaper you find women who have been teaching and who have used their students as predators. As victims. In the same case, you have men who have given too much attention to children throughout their lives and become or are predators. So that is an important distinction. The other thing is you have to deal with the issue as openly as possible. That was already in those days, It's not something you can hide or talk about in small committees, and it's useless to think about that you can talk about it like that, It has to be talked about in public, like now, Third wave. The third wave lasted from 2002 until 2008. And you know who it began with? Father John, and I can never pronounce his name, Jogan, in Boston. You remember Boston. You know the cardinal from Boston. He was taken off eventually. But it was terrible because he was tossed out of Boston and sent to Los Angeles. Or, I think it was Los Angeles now. And what the odd part about it was, he kept abusing people here. And they had to send him back, And they didn't send any information with him. How do you accept somebody from another diocese without information? What had they done? They'd cover up the information before they would send it so they could get him out of their territory. These were the bishops. It was cardinal law. And the Boston hierarchy. And what did he get to do? He got to go and live in the Vatican, not in the Vatican, in Rome, as head of St. Mary Major Cathedral, Basilica. He was promoted so that he could be moved out. There's a whole thing in that. Anyway, 2004, the Globe had written some 800 articles on the scandal in Boston, and Cardinal Law had resigned. 150 priests in Boston stood accused of sexual abuse, and more than 500 victims had filed abuse claims. The investigative series received widespread national attention. In the wake of this scandal, the Vatican instructed the U.S. Church to develop binding laws to protect children, leading to the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People adopted in Dallas in June 2002. And we have a committee here in this parish, or you have a committee here in this parish, that is very important because it has to report to the ones who are doing that commission in the bishops, among the bishops. You have every year an audit of parishes, and this last year you had a big audit that I know of in all the parishes. Now, in the wake of the scandal, the Vatican instructed the U.S. Church to develop binding laws. It goes on, widely known as the Dallas Charter, along with the essential norms for dealing with the allegations of sexual abuse. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops commissioned the John Jay Report on the nature and scope of sexual abuse of minors, and the National Review Board for the Protection of Children and Young People began its work, 2002-2003. There's only one little thing. You'll have to excuse my spelling. I did this about 3 o'clock this morning. But, wave link. Anyway, the wave weak link, try saying that 50 times. The wave weak link. Now, after the charter, dioceses across the country put in place much more robust policies, most importantly including zero tolerance policies. You've heard of that one, right? Regarding the sexual abuse of minors, and the charter required all dioceses to heal and promote reconciliation of victims, survivors, and their families. But what that meant is reconciliation. It didn't mean forgiving, but it meant to get them healthy. Make prompt and effective response to abuse allegations, cooperate with civil authorities, discipline offenders, create a safe environment for children and young people through training and screening, and everybody in this parish who's working as a volunteer in any way, they may scream and shout, but they have to go through all of these moments to get their fingerprints done. You have to have a background check. Who's going to be near your kids? I have to have a background check. Every time I go, or your pastor, or any of the priests go from here to another diocese, we have to have a letter. And that letter says you have your Virtus training up to date. I had to do a wedding in September for my cousin. And guess what? I had to get that especially for the day. And I forgot to almost, so I had to really work hard to get it. Please, please, please give me my letter. So we had to do all that. And then if I wanted to do something else, I was going to Italy last year on a pilgrimage, and I had to have the same letter with me to show them there. In Italy, wherever I stopped, I had to do that. So to create a safe environment for children, provide means of accountability for the future, and ensure the problem continues to be effectively dealt with through the Secretariat of Child and Youth Protection. Only one big hole in it, only one, imagine. And that was that it failed to provide an effective mechanism to hold bishops accountable for abuse and its cover-up. So guess where we are now? We are in the fourth wave, which started last year. And how did it start? Cardinal McCarrick, he has at least 17 counts against him. And these are seminarians also. I can't remember all of his details, but he has now been reduced to the lay state. In other words, he has taken all his rights of priesthood away. You can't take away the sacrament. But he cannot use his sacrament in any way whatsoever. The only problem with that is he's free to go wherever he wants until he's put into jail. That's the second hole in it. You let these guys, you defrock them, as they say, and what happens? Where do they go? They be on their own, no control. So it doesn't make much sense. Yes, sir?
Bill, there's a time between accusation, a trial, and subsequent of the trial, some punishment if he is found guilty. You're talking as if everyone that's accused is guilty.
No, I'm not.
Well,
Yeah, I hope I'm not. Because one of the things is these are accusations, yes, and they have to. I'm not talking about. This is the charter of the bishops of the United States, and what they do is they act promptly to remove the person from where he's ministering. And until he goes through all of the trials and has to do all these things, he is normally placed in a parish or a house or something that the archdiocese has. He cannot function as a priest until he is cleared. And it sounds horrible. It does, really. It sounds terrible. But they have to do something. They cannot just let him wander around, still continuing as a priest to function, because that will create even more anger and hatred among the people. Go ahead.
Is there a jury that decides whether the accusers are telling the truth?
Okay, there is a committee that has all sorts of people on it who are actually very well known in the judicial world. They sit on this committee with the diocese. And the diocese then has to take their recommendation. And if they find that it is a credible possibility, and I mean really credible, then they have to make the decision, and they say to the bishop, you have to remove his faculties, and you have to house him in a different place, and he cannot really talk to anybody because he has his lawyers, and he has to have his lawyers, the diocese has to have their lawyers. So all of these protocols are taken. If the person is judged innocent, it is still up to the bishop to receive him back into his parish. Okay? So at that point he does. And I know it sounds like you're judging and everything else beforehand, but there is this internal thing in the United States which includes lay people, and it includes judges, and it includes lawyers, canon lawyers, you name them. They're there, and they do have to, yes?
So the church is taking it upon itself to police and to double check everything.
Yes.
If they found that there's credible, then the judicial system of the United States takes over?
Well, they may take over anyway.
Right, so then that person is put into bail or charge?
Well, he's then charged. First of all, goes to grand jury, and then it's charged, and it is taken care of. And so what happens after he comes out? It's a good question. It was that in some way or another they would have to be monitored and kept out of, just like any other, excuse me for saying this, but any other predator, any other sex abuser goes onto a list of people. And therefore, he is going to have the same treatment that other people have. Yes, ma'am?
So, who pays for the accused attorney?
For the accused attorney, he is supposed to pay himself. You do receive, as a diocesan priest, you do receive your own salary. And you're putting away money, usually to retire eventually. And that money has to be taken and used to be paid for these things. Then, if they need to supply, there is a fund which they have that it comes from the priests themselves, actually. It doesn't come really from the donations of the people. It has to come from the priests themselves. And the priests have to contribute to something in that, because it is a brother priest. And they have to, in some way or another,
So, am I hearing you correctly that all the other priests, they're contributing to this one?
Well, we try to, yeah. And at the same time, I know that once in a while they have to take money from another source, and I have no idea where that source is from. I'm not informed of that. But I know that they have to have justice, so they have to, and sometimes they can't afford it, so what do they have? A pro bono or court-appointed judge, yeah. So it is, and I know that is a big question, the financial, who takes care of these people, where is our money going, And it's not going to that, I'll tell you. I think very clearly, at least from the time that I was in the parish in Bell Gardens, that that was not even a question, that they should use any of our parish monies that we put away for buildings, we put away for other things, and some of our parishes were very poor to have to deal with these people. Yes, ma'am. Sir.
When they get out, they also have to register
Mm-hmm.
predator.
Yes, and usually at that time, by that time, they have been reduced to the lay state. They have not. They had to redo the canon laws so that it could deal with people like this. The canon law is an evolving thing. It's sort of like precedents, which you have in a regular judicial system. But if you want to challenge things, and I know a priest who wants to challenge that, although, the final word is with the bishop, and yes, the Vatican might say, well, we think, there's room for looking at this as not being, but what he did in this case was he never took the advice of the Archbishop to, first of all, be evaluated. That's one of the big things. You have to go to a psychiatrist to be evaluated. That's one of the procedures. Nowadays, I joined the diocese in 2003. I had to go through a complete battery of tests that lasted 2 days with a psychiatrist in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. And by the time you're finished, they know all about you and what you've done. And it's very hard. I mean, the question is, you couldn't keep, excuse my saying so, your sexual background or your sexual, proclivities or whatever, they ask questions that you think would never even have anything to do with it. And believe me, they tell you whether or not you are allowed into the diocese. If I hadn't passed that test, I couldn't have gone into the diocese. In other words, you have to pass that test. And if they say to you, for example, you're passing the test, but we feel also that you need to have some care for other issues that you may have in your life, would you like to continue this? And you say yes or no, And it's a way of helping people to grow also. And nowadays, before they get seminarians in, they have to go through the same thing that we do. So you have your psychological testing. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned the seminarians. Do they also do that around the world?
That's the problem, you see. We have it here in the United States. Now, one of the issues is in the global place, The question is, in the world village, is it done? Well, it's hard to do it when you are at war. For example, I'll give you just simply the Congo. They're just trying to get, food to their people. You have no idea sometimes who's going in there. And that's also, excuse my saying this is also with the United Nations. Volunteers, they go in there, and you've heard about what's happened in some places where they've gone, where they've actually raped people, So it's how should I say, we're very lucky in one sense to be here, and in Western Europe it's even stricter and stronger. And it's how should I say, we are not too bad off with what we've done. And if you for example, you see these things that are put into your bulletin, those are thought of very carefully. And even if you don't like to see them, they're there. Let me finish this thing, okay? Even when the underlying abuse occurred decades ago, because some people say, there are just, people from the past that come up and they want to make money and they want to do this. I'm sorry, but, this is a lifetime damage that is done to a person. And people still suffer in their 60s, 70s, and 80s of what happened to them at the hands of a priest or a relative or somebody else when they were children. They feel that they have had something stolen from them. And it's interesting, the number that have been leaving the church has grown. At first it didn't seem to grow, but now it's growing. And the hard part about that is, it's not, how should I put it? In the Gallup polls, the church has remained stable. But the reason it's remained stable has nothing to do necessarily with the people who are leaving it, but it has to do with the people who are coming into the country and who are Catholics. And so the number of Catholics leaving is not seen clearly because of the number of Catholics entering the United States. So, oh no, things are okay. No, they're not. No, they're not, because they're coming also, and how should I put it? Now, priests from Mexico, priests from Africa, like Father Alidor had to go through the same thing I had to go through. He's now in the diocese, and he's awaiting for a parish. He's been cleared, and he's a fantastic priest, and they're going to give him a parish. But he is a man of honor, and he has done all the testing that had to be done. So they are very careful now. Now, their participation, this is where the problem comes up. They covered up abuse. The diocese sometimes covered up abuse, not just the bishops. And I'll tell you why in a minute, because people say they're horrible. Well, some of us were brought up a long time ago with the idea, and I remember this very clearly, anyone who causes these little ones to sin or, causes scandal, the word scandal has ever said anything, will be thrown into hell. Well, at a certain moment when you are a priest, you think, oh God, if I tell them about this, they're going to lose their faith. So it may sound weird, but the thinking of diocesan bishops of a certain age was, oh God, if I tell my people this, they're going to lose their faith. So instead of telling them, they kept it quiet. Now, the other thing you have to understand is that the study of this began maybe with the first predators in the 80s. And what eventually happened there was very interesting, because they would first of all say, oh yeah, we can heal them. And the bishop would take their word for granted. Oh yeah, we can heal them. And then they'd send them back, and you'd say, okay, good, they're healed, and we've got it certified and everything else. And then they'd put them back into service, and guess what? Oh my God, he's done it again. What does that mean? Well, maybe if we move him, then they start saying, if we move him, he'll get better. These are predators, and this is a lifelong, what do you call it? Sickness, yeah. And it started somewhere. And often they are the victims also of previous. Now, but there's also something, there is this incredible clericalism that has been destructive. There's a clerical culture. And what that means is, you have been very nice to us. You're very tolerant with the people that come to you and serve you, I must admit. But there comes a moment when you have to say something, and sometimes people don't want to say anything. They'll talk among themselves, but they will never confront a priest. And that is where the whole problem lies. Nobody's willing to confront. Now, there are ways of confronting it. There's no question about it. You can't just come up and complain about every single thing the poor guy is doing, because if you do, you're going to lose yet another guy who's valuable, But there is a certain moment when you say, this is something I need to tell you. That I am not comfortable with Father so-and-so who keeps coming over to my house, who keeps, visiting my child, who is taking my child out to get, parents have to be very careful. And if you say that to this man, he's going to have to work at something. Remember, we are two things. We hear confessions. We have the sacrament of confession. And then we also have, if you're an administrator, if you're a parish priest, whatever, you happen to be a mandated reporter. What is said to you in confession, people asked me in the last one, well, what do you do with somebody who goes to confession and confesses that. The same thing that happens when you go to confession, you don't say that, but let's say you say, I hate my wife, or I can't get along with her anymore, or I hate my husband, and I can't get along with him anymore. Am I supposed to say anything? No. I have the sacrament of confession and the seal of confession, and I can be excommunicated for saying something intentionally about you. Now, on the other hand, as a mandated reporter, I'll give you an example. I was a mandated reporter in Bell Gardens. Oh, God, Bell Gardens. Well, I knew my duty as a mandated reporter. A secretary came to me as pastor and told me that she had been abused by one of the associates who was in the parish at the time when I moved there. And this was upon my arrival. I tell you, I got this, all the stuff that happened to me was at my arrival in that parish. So what do? What do I have to do? I reported it. And immediately came two priests to talk to the priest who had been there and to talk to the woman. They had me completely out of the picture, and they had the priest go first to treatment, and then he was put out for a while to pasture. Now, this was an adult thing, and she, in a sense, was consenting, but it was like having sex in the middle of a workplace. You know, give me a break. You can't do that. Even, you know, have any companies? You can't do that. Yes.
What I'm hearing is all this is handled in the church. Where's the criminal justice system in this? And when is it reported?
When is it reported? Well, I'll get back to that in just a moment if you let me finish this one, okay? So, no, no, but that's a good question. I want to keep that in my mind, so I'm not going to forget it. But the question is here. He had to be moved out of the parish. She was given help as a victim. She remained in the parish working for us. I had to have another associate come in. But this was a consenting adult thing. They asked her if she wanted to press charges. You have to let the person press charges. She said no. Okay? So she actually said no. And we asked her a few times, are you sure of this? Yes, but I needed to tell someone. She told it. But it was mutually, you know, how shall I put it?
So it wasn't against the law.
No, it wasn't against the law. The only law was in harassment laws and cases. Okay, now let me take another case. Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've had other ones. Now, this one was someone, a parent in the school. Also, a member of our city council there. And the son, how did it go? Oh, no. Yes, the son said that to somebody that his father was abusing him. Guess what? As a mandated reporter, I called immediately. I had to call two places. I had to call to the archdiocese, who then told me to call the detectives, the police department, and have them come down. And I said, am I to call the parent? No, that will be the police department that will call the parent. So guess what? They came down. They interviewed him. There was a possibility. They removed the child from the care of the parents. And the member of the council, his wife, was absolutely spewing at me in my office because she was angry that this might be gotten to be known by her public. Now, does that tell you something?
Well, that's what happened in the church, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They didn't want anyone to know, so they moved them around.
Exactly. So, yes, we do have to call the police. And I've done that twice. In one case, for this one, also when the grandmother and the girl came and told me that her dad, the grandmother's son, had been abusing her, and the grandmother was there. We called the police, we called the archdiocese, and they came and took her into custody, took her into protective care, and they got the guy and they tried him and everything else. And guess what? The family hated the grandmother for the rest of her life. And she was, to me, a noble woman to have cared for her. So when the girl came out of protective care, they gave it to the grandmother because nobody else wanted her. Nobody else wanted the girl. And she was 12 years old. So, when we talk about calling justice, you have to. If I don't, what's going to happen to me? I'll be taken to court, I'll be prosecuted, and I will have collaborated. Yes?
So, like those two scenarios that you gave, if they were not priests or involved in the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
So had they been,
I would have had to do the same thing.
still call the police first, or you'd have to.
You have to call the two, but you can't. You have to go first to the archdiocese, and then they will tell you immediately, call the police. Okay. You have to. That was the way it was when I went into that parish in 2005. And that parish, I have never been in a parish that had so many of these things happen. I mean, I would be glad to say more, but it's getting a bit late, so I don't think it's, yeah.
Well, you're talking about people though that are not priests.
Uh-huh.
And you said I presume priests confess, they go to confession, right? And
Yeah, well, you hope.
Well, one would hope. But if you know that about another priest.
If he says that to you in confession, you cannot do a damn thing about it. Just as I have heard the confession of somebody who had been doing that, and I couldn't do a thing about it. All I could urge him to do was go and talk to a psychologist. But, they know that very well that they are mandated reporters. I can't do it.
Was that then part of this perpetuation of silence in the...
No, I don't think it has been, because these things have been, that is, as you say, it's sacramental. Whereas, if you see something, if you hear something, if you are in charge of them, you have to question them, then you're being a mandated reporter and you have to report. But no, the confession the secret was meant to help people feel comfortable. Well, now they're saying to us, maybe we should rethink it over. I don't know. I cannot say that in a sacramental situation, having given my life to that and knowing it's been such a grace for so many people, it's hard to turn that around and say it's awful and horrible. But they have made the distinction so clearly right now that you actually have to say to them, I am now speaking with you as a pastor of the parish, and you may not have to say it, but you do have to in some way or another let them know, that you are a mandated reporter. Sure.
What are children taught in school about if they are molested, or if what are they taught?
There is a special program that goes through first of all, there's the whole Virtus program that any volunteer has to go through. Have their hands...
We went through that.
You went through that. What do the children... There is a program, there are two programs that they go through. One is, what is it called? Something touch. Teaching. There are two that they've used, and I can't remember the first one and the second one. Yeah, teaching, touching, safety, that's right. And they're taught very clearly what a correct relationship is and what an increasingly predatory relationship is like. And so they are warned, and they're warned by their parents. That's why the parents have to be involved too. We've had very few parents, at least that I've known, who say, no, I'm going to tell them all this in private. Okay, but that makes it, again, a secret thing. And kids, want to keep the kindnesses that they receive sort of secret. And that is one of the first things a predator is very aware of. Just between you and me. Here, have a candy, have this, have that. And that happens, you know. Let me just finish this thing, and then if you have any more questions, I hope you have more questions. I was hoping that Father Aidan would come, but he's busy trying to get ready for his next journey into the land of the English. You know, it's really dangerous in England. No.
They have terrorists in England, too.
Oh, we have terrorists here. We have terrorists there. We have terrorists. Every time I think about the Congress, and I go down there because I have to stand in a booth all day for Mount St. Mary's on Saturdays, usually, because that's where I work. And I know lots of people, so they just stop by and say hello. And the problem is, you think to yourself, maybe I ought to have the name of my next of kin and stuff in my pocket. Have you ever had that feeling?
Yeah.
Nowadays? Yeah. You were going to say something.
I just had a question. The deacons have to go through the
Oh, yeah.
same testing.
Anybody. If you're going into ministry in the church, you have to be psychologically tested. You cannot keep out of it. And believe me, they will find out. And yet, it's sometimes almost, you say to yourself, well, who is going to be? Who is it? Well, they have a way of finding out. And I have a whole other slide presentation on the profile of an abuser, but I don't think you want to go 4 hours. Anyway, one of the things that lay leadership has to do is protect children and vulnerable adults, secure justice and healing for survivors, and those are the ones you've got to think of first. You've got to think about the survivors first, not the victimizer. And that's extremely important because we have been a church that has considered always the victimizer. Oh, poor father, what's he going to do? Oh, poor this. But you know what? Who's the one who's going to have lifelong results from this abuse? Yeah. So provide real accountability for bishops and genuine transparency regarding cases of abuse and cover-up until zero tolerance of abuse. Reform the clerical culture. That's extremely important. So that abuse and its cover-up can never happen again. Let's see if I have anything else to say. Oh, yeah, oops. No, this was another present. Come on. Okay. One of the things that's extremely important, we can have commissions, we can have judges, we can have everything else. And this is my last slide, believe it or not. And all of these things are wonderful. The procedural, the things we've done are incredible in the years that we've done them. But it all has to be rooted in a sense of holiness and mission. A revitalized understanding of the radical claims of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's why I started with the idea of what is civility. That's just the start of it. What is forgiveness? And now, tomorrow, we're going to take it one more step, and I'm going to introduce you to somebody who's an amazing woman. But I'll tell you that later. She's not coming in, but she'll be on my little... We're going to have a little respite from me and the conversation with you, and hopefully it'll help with all the stuff we've given today. Pope Francis, in his letter, said this, following what happened in Pennsylvania. He says, we cannot create projects and structures without roots, without memory, without faces, but instead must halt before the sufferings of the innocent without excuses or cowardice to discover the model of a true follower of Christ. I think that is the word right there. And I will tell you that, people say, why are they looking into the files in the past? Are they just searching for people so they can accuse them? No. We have to make it clear. And I will tell you, there was a policy. When I left this parish, I became the head of the order. And I went through the files that I had there. And my predecessors had nothing on the people who were in those files. And there was I was looking specifically for one man who had, by that time, died and who was a predator. and who had been put into jail. This was the 1930s. This was in the 1930s. Nothing. Changed to the Diocese of Liège, to the Southern Diocese of Belgium. Nothing else. Could you imagine? They had to go through court cases. He was accused of 10 children in the 1930s, and nothing was in the files. So we had to review all the files and get them up to date, you know. And it was so people sometimes say, "What are you guys doing? Just searching for these lists? We're tired of seeing these lists." Why are those lists there? To give people who have been hurt the understanding that we know and we're ready to work and to do something about it. You get it? So, has this affected the church? Yeah, it has. Lots of people have left. And I must say there have been moments when I have gone, it was fascinating to do this for you. Because I, at a certain moment, was extremely depressed. I teach at a university now. I am considered retired by the Diocese of Los Angeles. They retired me about 3 years ago because they had forgotten about me. I was teaching up at Mount St. Mary's, and I get a call, and they say, "You know what, Bill? We've forgotten about you." "What do you mean you forgot about me?" "You were supposed to have retired at 70. You are now 72. And we have to put you into the right category, and so you are retired. And here's your golden car that you get. You get a car from the diocese, so your last car. I think they hope that it won't lose its brakes, and that you won't cost them too much at the end. But here's your pension. Here is what you have to do. Goodbye. But they say, could you also help out in this parish and that parish and the other parish? Well, I'm still full-time at the Mount and will be there for a few more years at least. And I'm enjoying that. I don't like the commute. I get up at 4, I leave at 5, say Mass at 8. In between there I pray. I pray when I'm in the car, believe me. It's a long commute. I've been doing it for 9 years, and then I come back in the evening when I teach from 10 until 4:30, and then I go and have a nice sort of meal with the sisters for whom I work on as their chaplain, and then I sit around and wait, and I can get home in an hour. Back to my little girls. You know I have girls, don't you? My little doggies. My doggies are at the hospital right now. Her tail is, we lost one. I lost, me. That's the only person who lives in that house. But I feel like I have these children of mine that are around me, right? And so I just lost one dog. And that dog and the second dog used to really get along beautifully. And now she's biting her tail and showing signs of anxiety. And I am suffering deeply. So she's right now in the hospital while I'm here. And I've sent her sister to go take care of her. Her name is Haley. Haley Spirit. She arrived on the door of my rectory on Pentecost. So I decided to call her Haley Spirit. And when I really get angry, I say, "Spirit, come over here." And she comes. But yes, there we are. I hope this has been in some way helpful. Yes. Go ahead, ask a question. But I just want to make sure that it's now 5 after.
I could talk to you after, but the thing is that this is great, all the stuff that's written down that's to be done, but yet what we hear from the media, obviously, because the church isn't really addressing it, I don't think, locally or otherwise,
Really?
is that, like McCarrick,
Oh, yeah.
and whoever it was in Philadelphia and all around, they've known about it for years and been telling people about it for years, and nothing was ever done. So whether it was in 1990s or the 2005, 2010, nothing was done until the media made such a stink up.
Yeah.
And finally, somebody, including Pope Francis.
I know. There we are. You have.
I think that's a frustration, and so that's what I want to know is, what is the church really doing?
Well,
Are they really doing anything?
well, one of the things we do have all this in place. The thing is, they are now, and they have been working on what do you do with a bishop when he hides this, or he hides somebody, or he himself. You remove them, but I think they've made a mistake. Actually, they should at least keep him without. I think he should become a priest, like everybody else. He just stops being a bishop. That he should be he should continue to be kept under observation. Of course, now he's going to go. He's going to be judged by the courts, and Pell, the great man who was the financial officer for Ratzinger and for this man. Well, guess what? He was, he was judged guilty in Australia. He's going to have to go to, I don't know how many years he's going to go, but it's not that much. You should have many more. But, for example, what do you do with this man? I think they're thinking, do we have control over him or not? Should he be reduced completely? Because then we don't have any control over him. When you become a layperson again, that's the courts that have to take care of you. And right now he's staying in a monastery because the monastery is helping him. But what's going to happen afterwards? I think this whole issue of what do you do with bishops and how do you do it, it's still, and they will come out some very serious guidelines, I'm sure. And thank heavens we're an evolving church. Sorry.
No, I'm just kind of piggyback. I think the frustration for me, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, as a Catholic of our church, the pedophiles are everywhere. They're in our families, they're in our neighborhood, they're at your work.
Yeah.
For them to realize, say, oh, we don't have it in our faith, and not deal with it. So why don't they just come out and say, yes, we had the problems, we're going to go through it all, we're dealing with it, and clean it. This is a cleansing that this church needs.
I agree, and that's what we have. I think here in this diocese they have tried very hard. And yes, they revised all these lists. And yes, there's a new bishop in town. He's very quiet.
Right.
You'd like him to be a bit more vocal once in a while in these areas. But at least we know, believe me, it's being taken care of, And all I can say is, he may be taken out of here soon and put as the new Pell in the Vatican. I wouldn't be surprised. He's an accountant. That's what he did before he joined his order. Yeah, our present Archbishop.
It just seems like one of the main things to me is the mandated reporters, and I was one for 3 years.
Yeah.
A mandated reporter is mandated to report to the authorities, not to the hierarchy.
Exactly.
That he works for. And where I think this gets lost in the structure of the church, my guess, is that an authority in the church has the passive or direct authority to stop the mandated reporting. That's the perception that I have.
No way.
Like, why would things drag on so long at the front end if that wasn't true?
I don't think that that's the case. They can't keep you. They cannot say to you, you will not report. It's up to your conscience. And quite honestly, if you see on the mandate you are to report to the police also, then you report to the police. And he has nothing to say about that. There are certain things you have the freedom to do. I remember when I reported this one priest, not to to get him out of the parish and everything else, I had another priest who was his friend who started abusing me on the telephone and saying, you're this, that, and the other. And what I had to say to him was, you take care of your parish. You have no right to say to me anything. And I actually went to the vicar for clergy and I said, what about this? He said, you tell him if he has any problem with that at all, he is not to call you, and he has to stay out of your business. So this was another guy who was trying to protect this priest. You can't be protected if you've done something wrong. You can't and you shouldn't be. So, I don't know, I hate to say this, we are now at 10 over. If you'd like to speak to me afterwards, maybe? Or you want one more question?
One question.
Okay.
You always see views about the priest and the priest and the priest. Is there any abuse among the nuns?
Oh, yeah. And I think that is, when that is taken care of, it has to be, they are part of the mandated reporters too, And yes, there have been, and some terrible things that have come to light in the past. But how shall I say it? Who has the power the most? I said this yesterday. Men have the power a lot more than women. But when women have the power in a classroom or in an administrative situation, it can be the same thing. So they have to be treated, all have to be treated equally, I think, And yes. But right now, it's, I'll tell you this much. We're going to get to that tomorrow. I do feel that we need to pray, become a holy church, become people who realize that our faith does not depend on a priest, a bishop, or even a pope. My faith does not depend on them. And it hasn't for a long time. My faith depends on Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit, and the Scriptures. And yes, maybe the ancient tradition of the church, but excuse me, there's no hierarchy. I belong to you. I belong to the community of the faith. And we should be able to celebrate that in the Eucharist honestly and deal with each other honestly. You should be able to call me to attention when I need it, just in the same way that I have to do it for you. The other part of the situation is, it's interesting, I went into a church that had a lovely round altar and people around it, and the church was gorgeous. You'd come in through the front door, you come in under the sign of the cross, you had this big, huge wading pool, I guess it was a huge pool, where you put your hand and, bless yourself, which was where people died to their sins, were risen with the Word of God, the amble was in front, and then the altar was in the middle for the Eucharist, and that was lovely. And that was great. And it's been renovated by a young man. And now guess what? They're all lined up in front of the altar, which has been moved to the wall. They've covered up the risen Christ and put a cross there. And so it looks like any other old church. I used to be able to preach from that. It was lovely. But you felt that you were surrounded by people and you could talk with them. With them, not at them. Thank you very much for your evening. Would you like a prayer? Let's go. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. Oh, God, bless this community. Bless us in our own search for truth and for peace in our hearts. Help us to be able to discern the good from the bad, the right from the wrong, but most especially place us in a place where we feel responsible for each other, where we love each other, no matter our faults or our foibles. But help us all to be true to the gospel of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.